Welcome to the Exploring Unschooling podcast. I'm Pamela Riccia, unschooling mom and author, bringing you interviews, information, and inspiration about unschooling and living joyfully with your family. You can find the episode show notes, your free Exploring Unschooling ebook, and lots more information at livingjoyfully.ca. And here's the show. Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Riccia, and this is episode number 17 of the podcast, and it's the 27th of April, 2016, as I record this intro. In this episode, Anna Brown and I answer listener questions. Ann Oman wasn't available to join us this month, but Anna and I valiantly soldiered on. The topics we cover include the challenges of family visits, moving away from tightly controlling a child's diet, and unschooling an only child. Thanks for sending in your questions, and remember, if you'd like to submit a question, just go to livingjoyfully.ca/podcast and click on the link. As an update this week, the Childhood Redefined Summit is this weekend, so I have been busily preparing for that. I think we're going to have a great time diving deep into unschooling, building a strong foundation of understanding, and teasing out ways to help it thrive in our individual families. I'm excited to let you know how it went next week. And this week's quote comes from Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator. He writes, "Knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, and with each other." There are lots of things I love about this image. One is how intimately learning or gaining knowledge is woven into living. They are not separate things. Then there's how messy and sometimes uncomfortable it sounds. Real, meaningful learning is not as clear-cut and clean as a school curriculum implies. Add in the image of human beings pursuing learning rather than the more conventional image of an empty child being filled with information. And the idea that learning isn't about facts themselves, but about context and connections in the world, and with each other. It's a beautiful description of living and learning. If you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation, head on over to livingjoyfully.ca/podcast and share in the comments for episode 17. And now, on to the questions. Welcome to another Q&A episode. I'm Pamela Riccia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Anna Brown. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Anne isn't able to join us today, but Anna and I are excited to tackle this month's questions. So why don't you start us off, Anna?
Okay, so first we're going to start with a question from Caitlin. We're radically unschooling with our 3-year-old. I found your discussion of family visits to be really helpful. I think it was episode 4, briefing and debriefing, taking seemingly critical comments and questions playfully, etc. My daughter is prone to meltdowns, sometimes just because we couldn't understand what she said or something's frustrating her, she can't get her words out and gets really upset and needs to be by herself. It makes it harder with my family because these tend to be preceded by mild loss of control, like screaming at someone that's something she wants. And their response is to ask her to say please, but often by that time she's already frustrated and has a meltdown, and some of my family members will persist in trying to make her say please, even when she can't get the words out. I've already made a really conscious decision that it's worth it to visit family. She really loves being with them generally, but how do I reduce this stress? It's so hard on her. In the moment, I can go with her into a quiet room to recover, but I'd like to try to coach family members to prevent these happenings in the first place. So I will start, and basically I just want to talk about, early on we introduced the concept of space with my oldest, who would also get really overwhelmed in some social situations and family situations. And we would recognize that there were signs that something was coming kind of before the events happened and when it was becoming too much. And before we get to that point, we'd say, oh, let's take some space, or hey, do you want to take some space? And we started this when she was very young. When we'd go into a new environment, we would actually scope out the quiet place. Like, okay, this looks like a good place for us to have space if we need it. When we'd first come in, and we'd talking to the host if necessary and all of that. And so we knew that it was there before things started to get overwhelming. And part of that process was talking about how our body feels when overwhelm is starting. And that can be things like tightness or hard to have a thought, noises or lights may start to bother you more, things like that. So we talked about those kind of physical things that she could start identifying from a very early age. And because we really found that kind of preventing was the best strategy for all involved. It's really hard to coach other people in a certain way when they don't understand. And really what we found is it's just a super helpful skill to take with you throughout life, knowing when you're starting to feel overwhelmed before it becomes an issue, knowing the tools that you need to calm down and recenter is just so helpful in so many environments. But I do think there can be an educational piece for family members and maybe about different personalities. For us, we're all introverts, so crowds and parties really aren't the easiest for us. So kind of having in a separate situation, talking with family members about, how they see things, what they do, that can just be really helpful in understanding that we're all different. Actually, in my family, we all did the Myers-Briggs just for fun to see, and it just opened up some really fun conversations about the different ways that we process information. What about you, Pam?
I loved that focus on all the things you can do with your child to get through these moments. Mm-hmm. I'll focus a bit more on the family member side, because she's asking about coaching family members, and I agree. Thinking of it as coaching family members isn't probably a very useful perspective to bring to it, because you're trying to control their behavior rather than your child's, right? And unless they've kind of asked for your help, like they want that kind of coaching, it probably won't go over very well because it'll feel like control, right? Right. So what I've done in similar situations, long ago, was that I would approach them like I would my child, as in I would share information with them. And then you just see what they want to do with it. And that sharing probably, certainly for me, wouldn't have been done in a formal way, though that depends on how your family communicates typically, right? But I would watch for when a space might come up in a conversation away from the visits themselves. I loved your idea of scoping out, spaces for you guys to go, and that would be a great thing to bring up in the conversation with other family members. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's validating and understanding where they're coming from, and then just explaining what you see with, in your case, her daughter, like how you know the kinds of situations where she might get frustrated, that you're working with her, but that, once it bubbles over, that you've noticed she's not able to communicate well, and insisting that she do that doesn't really help. And then sharing with them what does help, sharing them, we have this space set up, we're going to go there. Because then you almost enlist, if they're interested, the family members to help you out. Right. Because definitely the other piece I was going to add was watching the environment and looking for those clues ahead of time so that you can get involved before it turns. So your space idea or some sort of shared word, that one or the other one can tell. And, it's time for us to do this process, to go off, calm down for a little bit, just regroup a little bit. But, if your family members understand that that's what you're doing, they see you doing something, so they don't feel like they need to insist on their way. And they can maybe even come up to you and say, hey, I think she's starting to get, worked up over whatever. And, point it out so that they can say, hey, let's go find your mom, or come get you, and you guys can take over from there. But I think the main thing is to share that information with them, to validate what it is they are trying to do, because they're coming at it also from their perspective, right? They're not trying to piss your daughter off.
Right.
They and I found that when I shared information like that, and not in a big sit down, I think we need to sit down and talk about how you treat my daughter kind of conversation, but it'll come up here and there, and then just see what they do with it. They may not be interested, and that way to make sure that you're close by right now when she's having more challenges that way, so that you can try and see the signals and jump in before it happens. I think that's really all you can do with family, because it's their relationship to develop. No matter how much I wanted to see, my parents or whatever family member's relationship with my daughter, however I imagined it in my head, I can't force the two of them to do that, right?
Right. No, definitely.
So all I can do is support each of them as best I can, let them know what's going on, and then see what happens.
I think something that's really important about what you just said is that kind of helping them find their role, because especially with a new grandbaby and 3-year-old still pretty young, we're all kind of feeling our way. And I think when we're working together, it doesn't become just, I'm the parent, I know best, I'm going to take my child over here. It becomes, oh, this is what's happening, and we're talking, and they do have some kind of role, even if it is just to bring the child back to you if they're feeling upset, or if they know about the space, if that works for your child, or they know about another special way to calm them or whatever. I think that just helps everybody feel engaged and involved, because they do want to be a part of those kids' lives.
Yeah, exactly. And they can feel so much more helpful, because they don't want a lot of conflict either, right? All right, question number 2. Ooh, another one from Caitlin. This is the second question about my 3-year-old. We are radical unschooling in the sense that she makes decisions about food and bedtime and clothes and baths, and we give her information about those choices and try to think of options that work for everyone. One of the last things I've been forcing is nail trimming. She's really scared of it, and when her nails are too long, I usually have a kind of standoff where I talk to her about it and won't do anything else until she lets me trim them. But I'm currently trying out letting this be in her control. The result is that her nails are really long and breaking in a couple of places. I don't think she wants her nails to be long, and I try to talk to her about it, but she tells me she's scared to cut them. I've tried asking her how to make it less scary, but don't get a response. I'm not really sure what direction to go next. So I'll start with that one. I think just in general, from the way you phrase the question, one thing that might be helpful to think about is not to think of anything as being in your control or her control, but to think of it as you guys working together. I think that is one of the big pieces when you first start learning about unschooling or living it with your family, because it's not about one or the other, because you've still got that dichotomy set up. It's like, okay, I'm ready to give up control over this and give it to my child. That's a lot of responsibility to hand to your child. But when you think of yourself as helping them, it gives you so much more freedom, I think, to work together, to come up with solutions, to actually be involved, not just, giving things into her control seems like you've all of a sudden taken on a passive role in the situation. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's something to consider. Specifically, I guess questions to ask. You said you think she's unhappy with her nails being long, but, you don't know that for sure. I think by now, from the way you've described it, she certainly knows that trimming her nails is an option in the situation. I think what you might be able to focus on more is whether or not what's happening with it. If she's inadvertently scratching you or other people's while she plays or hugs or whatever, share that kind of information with her. Show her what's happening, not theatrically like, oh my goodness, look what happened. You scratched me. Oh, it hurts. But, it's like, ow, show her, oops, that's scratched, careful with your nails, ask her to be careful, because I'm sure she doesn't want to be going around hurting people. That's the root issue. What you've done with, by focusing on the nail trimming, you've jumped right to a particular solution.
Right.
Rather than trying to work together to figure out a way through it. So maybe you can live for a while with longer nails and see what actually transpires. And I think what you'll find is once the pressure that she's feeling to submit to nail trimming subsides a bit, and you really get to looking at the root issue, which is, being careful not to hurt others with longer nails. I think she'll be more open to brainstorming ways to do that. And at that point, rather than, here we're back to that control piece again, rather than handing it to her and asking her ways to make it less scary to trim her nails, you can brainstorm ideas with her. It's something you guys will figure out together. I know when my kids were younger, they didn't like it, and I used to bite their nails shorter for them, There's just so many different options. When you don't jump to your particular solution, sometimes it's hard to realize that, hey, there are other options here. But, when you let it sit for a while, it's really cool what things can come up. So what do you think, Anna?
Yeah, we always say the same things. But that's kind of what I was thinking, is that, I'm guessing she probably would initiate wanting to trim them in some form or another if given the space, and it might involve some cracked nails, or she might, figure out that it doesn't work for some of her games to have longer nails. And so then she'd understand the utility of cutting them. That way that decision's coming from her. I think she'll be more inclined to find ways to make it work when she feels the need herself versus, mom coming in and anticipating this need and then providing the solution. And again, if the nails are impacting, you, the mom specifically, they're scratching or, something along those lines, then I would definitely share that impact, just like you talked about. I feel like for my approach is really just to share my observations and my own personal boundaries, but understand that that individual is going to take that information and their own information and make the best decision for themselves. So we kind of work together on that, as they tell me why they like the nails or why they don't want to trim them. And I talk about, well, here's what's working for me and what's not working for me. And one of my kids really did have very long nails when she was young, and she liked them that way. They would sometimes break, and she just didn't like trimming, and she didn't like nail biting. And, so I just would give her some tools to keep them clean, or, share observations if I felt like, oh, that, ouch, that was scratching me, or they're impacting something else she's doing. And I guess for me, the bottom line is, kids are really able to understand so much more than they're given credit for. And I think we don't know that because they're not given time. We swoop in with our solutions and agendas before there's even space to form an opinion and decide for themselves. And given the chance to decide for themselves, they will. And then you have this sense of autonomy that I think is so important for children, especially in our society where they're kind of given short shrift a lot. So, I think it's just all those things tied up into one, but it's, working together and sharing observations and just giving some time and space around coming to those conclusions.
Yeah, I think one of the, I don't know if it's I was going to say undervalued, but certainly maybe conventionally, but I think time is just one of the most important things, with unschooling, because you give time for things to develop, time for people to think, time for people to observe, for things to happen, for, information to naturally come in so that, it can be part of the decision. And I think one of the challenges, when we talk about control, because, we do talk a lot about it being their decision, because that's how they learn. They're, okay, this is, I think, my best choice right now. And then seeing how that plays out. And then that experience gets brought into the next choice and the next choice and the next choice. But letting them make the choice does not mean you're not involved in the process leading up to it. Yeah, it's sharing information, listening to them, and really understanding the information they're sharing and their perspective and all that kind of stuff. It really all comes together there, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And again, like I think I shared in the other podcast before, but my mantra of there's plenty of time. I mean, there always is time. It doesn't have to be done right this second. It really doesn't. Nails are going to be fine. Nails are going to get long. Nails are going to break. And even if a nail gets hurt, because it breaks below the quick or something like that, like that's okay. We don't have to protect from everything. If that's what she's needing to experience, that's what she's wanting to do. We talk about information about that and sharing what's happening. So yeah, it's just that back and forth dialogue. It's not, oh, it's all up to you or it's all up to me. It's that interplay between there.
Yep. Lovely.
Okay. So our next question is from Beth. I really enjoyed listening to the podcast episode with Bree Jontry talking about unschooling a child with chronic illness. We have been unschooling for 3 years, and I'm definitely still deschooling. We don't have chronic illness in our house, but my 8-year-old son, as well as myself, have chronic tooth decay tendencies, which can be kept under control. There's that bad word, by following a very similar diet to one you would ideally follow with type 1 diabetes, minus the insulin. For several years, I did tightly control his diet in this way, as I do my own, because we do not have dental insurance and do not have the money to pay for expensive dental work. I recently had conversations with him apologizing for my control, telling him that I respect him, and explaining how our food choices really do affect our teeth, and that Mommy and Daddy don't have the money to pay for more big dental work. I told him that he has the freedom to make his own choices with food now and asked him to honor what he knows about his body and our finances and his choices. I made sure to add that he's worth all the money at the dentist, just that I don't have it. He is not wanting to honor these things, which makes me believe that there's some healing that needs to take place in his heart from the years of being so controlled. He also seems to be angry for the very fact that his body is this way and doesn't want to accept it. What wisdom would you offer to me about facilitating healing, shutting down the fear in my own heart as I see him reaching for food that to me looks like dollar signs and credit card debt at the dentist? Well, so this is a little bit tough because I think you're right in that he's kind of rebounding from that earlier control. And so there's that kind of binge period and clamping down and I'm going to control it myself and kind of not take in other input. I think that's really common when you're kind of bouncing back from that controlled piece. But I really have seen in many other situations where that kind of thing evens out. And so here we go back to there's time, there's plenty of time. The tooth decay isn't going to happen instantly, just take that deep breath and know that, trusting and kind of have that energy of trust, I think helps. And maybe there's some tools that you can find that would help mitigate things a bit that might make you feel more comfortable. So maybe something like brushing more frequently or adding foods like bone broth and healthy fats, things that, can help with teeth and tooth decay. So instead of thinking of it as just like avoiding foods, focus on adding foods that help our teeth. So he doesn't feel this deprivation, but just, we're adding new things. And I would also look at the foods he's reaching for and find alternatives together. So if he's looking for something sweet or salty, kind of understand what he's looking for and then together create some yummy foods, that maybe have ingredients that you feel more comfortable with and that he loves and tastes and understands. But for me, again, it kind of just all falls back to this, what we were talking about before, this sharing my best information and the impacts like, the person has, but knowing that ultimately the individual makes the decision about their own bodies and, that we're going to continue and continue to work together, because I think that's the critical piece. So sharing the information and working together. And I think you'll see as he begins to trust that you're actually working together on this and that it's not a top-down decision, that he'll want to participate in finding solutions that feel good to you both, which again, may be things about different foods or creating different things or different brushing habits or different, whatever that looks like. There's all this huge amount of solutions that we can find. And so just trusting that. And as you start trusting that working together piece, all kinds of new solutions can come up. So, but I do feel like addressing your piece about, kind of his heart was hurt, honoring him and his emotions through this transition will go a long way in healing any past issues. And so that would be my focus, the relationship over the teeth, because I think you'll find the rest of it falls into place, even though I know that's hard to kind of let go of sometimes in the moment. Pam, what about you?
Yeah. Um, I think that's the biggest piece. I mean, it's going to be a lot, as you've said there, right there in your question. It is going to be a lot of processing for you, so that you're able to facilitate that healing. Because the way you worded it here, you've still set up a lot of expectations with, even though you've opened up. Telling him that he can choose what he eats, you still have a lot of expectations on his choices, because, as you said, you're seeing dollar signs and credit card debt every time he's picking some food. So, and by talking about teeth only in the context of money, like boiling it down to that money, it really feels like you've handed him a whole bunch of issues and fears surrounding money, not really health.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because as Anna said, if you open everything up, there's just so much more to the situation about caring for teeth and what you choose to eat. So much more than the maybe money that it might cost.
Right.
And certainly, if you find higher risks and things, those are part of the conversations. But it does seem like you've said, okay, I have all these fears about food. I know I don't want to control you, because I can see that controlling your food hasn't worked well for our relationship. But I'm gonna hand you control, and I'm gonna hand you all my fears around it, and I'm gonna hope that you make the same choices that I think you should make.
Right.
So rather approach it as a learning experience for both of you, something that you're doing together. And yeah, the trust piece is gonna take a while. And as Anna said, he's might feel the need as part of it to kind of test that, but once you open it up to not just food that's going in, when you look at all the other things that you can do, like Anna talked about, adding things, maybe changing up brushing, all sorts of other ways that you can approach that question and explore that question, I think that can go a long way to helping you guys feel like you're working together. Because, I can see how much you're focused on the diet, and maybe, and that works well for you. Even talking about an ideal type 1 diet. I mean, that's something that we really don't talk about and don't have. We don't have an expectation that the insulin is there because that's what their body needs to process that. You guys are going to find the things that helps his body process what he's choosing or wanting to put in it. Mm-hmm. It's because once you set up an ideal of anything, that's an expectation. And then all of a sudden that adds so much pressure to the choices that the choices become about the ideal, not about the person's individual needs. And then they're not really learning as much about themselves because they're just comparing themselves to the ideal. They're not looking to see how their body reacts or how their body takes on what they're putting in. They're just judging what they put in against that ideal. So they're missing a huge piece of the self-awareness that they can develop around the issue.
Mm-hmm. That's so important, I think.
Okay, question number 4. This one's from Susan. Quickie one. She says, can you talk a little about how unschooling with an only child is different from unschooling of siblings? For me, I don't think the unschooling itself, from the parent's point of view, is any different. You're supporting your child, you're helping your child explore the world and supporting their needs and interests and all that kind of stuff. I mean, sometimes I hear concerns about learning social skills and stuff when it's an only child, but they're still living and engaging with other people, with their parents. There's still people in the house, they're not living on their own. When they want to do things at home, they still are considering other people's needs. Sure, they don't have other siblings' needs that are part of the equation, but there's certainly lots of other things to consider. So they're still gaining that self-awareness. They're still learning how to live with other people, and as unschooling parent, if your child is wanting engagement, more engagement with other children, there are so many ways to support that rather than just siblings themselves. You can invite other kids to play. There's group activities all over the place, that they can join up. It all still becomes about self-awareness, helping them become aware of what they would like, introvert, extrovert, all those points in between, the interests, how they like to learn, all that stuff. So it's still ultimately, from my perspective, the same unschooling. It just may look different how it works for your child, but that's it. It looks completely individual for all unschooling children.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have several friends, close friends, who have only children that they're unschooling. And honestly, my first thought is it's a little bit easier. And because what I see is that they really do, they're getting to devote their facilitating energy to one child, as opposed to kind of having to meet some competing needs, in the same household. So, it works beautifully, and the two people that I'm thinking of, one is extremely more on the extroverted scale and one is more on the introverted scale. And so those day-to-day things look a little bit different, but it's again, what you said is just about knowing your child and that self-awareness, because with unschooling, what's so great about it is we really are living in the real world where we are, talking to our parents and we're solving problems in our house because we're actually living together. We're not all off separately. We're at the grocery store, we're going to museums, we're doing different things, so we're interacting just in every day with all sorts of different people. So, the socialization piece, that people talk about just really isn't a concern because we're actually socializing with different ages, different parts of town, different things, and so I think it all just unfolds naturally. So it's really just about listening to your child. So the process of it is really no different because it is just about learning that individual child and facilitating. And like you said, it's going to look different for each child within your 3, my 2, or, Pat's 1.
All right. You want to take the last question, Anna?
Sure. Okay. So we have our last question, question 5 from Stacy. Hi, Pam. Thanks so much for your podcast. It has been very helpful. I have a question about evaluations. In our state, we are required to have a yearly evaluation. My concern is that we have been deschooling. I have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. The first couple of months were challenging to us to let go of the, quote, old model. After a few weeks, we were finally able to let it go, and my girls have really been enjoying their free time to stay up late, sleep in, watch TV, draw. It has been 7 months since we decided to unschool, probably more like 5 if you consider our, quote, sticky start. We need to have an evaluation in a couple months, and I do not know how to prepare for this or what to expect. My kids have been resistant to anything that appears like schoolwork or projects. They watch a lot of TV and definitely learn a lot from the shows they watch, but I'm not sure how this transfers into the evaluations. Do you have any suggestions for us? Thank you. I guess my first thought is I feel like I need a little bit more information about the type of evaluations, because it's very different from state to state, and maybe in Canada, I'm not sure exactly how it works for you guys. In general, I've seen that children who are unschooling and even in that deschooling phase are taking in lots of information and really don't have problems with testing or evaluations. In our state, we have an annual testing requirement, but it is such a non-event. I mean, I remember early on we were taking one, the kids were young, like in kind of the elementary school age, and it was dealing with subject-verb agreement. And they sailed through it as if, like, how could they, it was so funny. They're like, would anybody pick these other answers they're thinking, and we've never had a lesson in subject verb agreement. We've never done a worksheet. We read and we talk, And so I felt so bad for the children that had spent hours and hours doing worksheets on subject verb agreement, because it's really just, you just live your life and you're doing. So, learning's happening all the time. So I think you might be surprised. But again, I think it depends on what kind of an evaluation. So I would say to really investigate what options your state has and to understand what they're looking for. For us, we do a test that's a standardized test that we could administer in our home, and then we just keep that on file. I know there are some places that do portfolios, and so you kind of have to translate what you've been doing into this, education ease for the portfolio. But there are people unschooling in all the states and Canada and beyond. So, it may be talking to some of your local unschoolers about what those evaluations look like if you're not clear about that. But I don't know, Pam, if you have more information or know anything else want to add to that.
That was my big point. The evaluations are very specific to the place that you live.
Right.
I know that states, even provinces here in Canada, they're widely different.
Oh, okay.
So my biggest suggestion was to check in with unschooling groups in your particular area, because I know for those that have evaluations, that's something that comes up on those lists. Absolutely. And in those groups, and they share examples of their own. So I think in general, really what it is taking the time to translate what you're seeing in their lives, unless it's testing, and translating that into the language of the evaluation. And that's what you're going to see from your local information. So I would start with whatever it is that they're asking for, and then just brainstorm ways that you see that unfolding in their lives. Because I think it'll take a bit of a mind shift at first, because that's where you are. Like, I don't know how to do it. But once you get started and your brain kind of shifts into that mode, I bet you will see all sorts of ways that you can translate all the learning that's in your children's lives right now into their more formal language. Because, as Anna said, they really are learning lots. So I think in the show notes, I'm pretty sure there's an article or two floating around just in general about that translation of activities into educationese. So I will definitely link to those in the show notes. But yeah, definitely follow up with local groups that and just ask, because they're always so generous in sharing that kind of information. All right, that was our last question. I want to thank you so much, Anna, for answering questions with me. And as always, if you would like to submit a question for the Q&A show, just go to livingjoyfully.ca/podcast and click on the link. And wishing everybody a great day. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes at livingjoyfully.ca/podcast. You can also get your free Exploring Unschooling ebook at livingjoyfully.ca/exploring unschooling. If you'd like to connect, you can also find me on Facebook at Living Joyfully. Until next time, have fun living and learning with your family.